Imagine a young African leader, 38 years old, virtually unknown on the world stage, walking alone into a room full of the richest and most influential men on the planet. Everyone expected a speech from someone asking for help, from someone coming with his hat in his hand, but he brought something very different, a vision so bold that it promised not only to lift up his country, but to redefine relations between entire continents, making even the most powerful and skeptical prince rethink everything. In the beating heart of Riyadh, where mirrored skyscrapers pierced the blue Arabian sky, stood the monumental King Abdulaziz Conference Center, a modern palace bathed in gleaming marble and sparkling crystals. It was here, amidst corridors that echoed with the quiet hum of global power, that the fate of entire nations would be determined with the ease of a sip of Arabic coffee and the firmness of a billionaire's handshake. The air vibrated with a palpable electricity, the subtle tension that always accompanies meetings where the world's richest minds and most influential leaders gather, each carrying the weight of their economies and the hopes of their peoples, ready to weave the intricate tapestry of global finance. On this grand stage, where the future was being negotiated in astronomical figures and strategic alliances, the figure of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman loomed like a sun in his own system, his magnetic presence commanding immediate respect and attention. Young, bold, and with a vision that was already radically transforming not just his kingdom but the entire Middle East, he was preparing for yet another marathon of pitches, listening intently to the tech giants, oil tycoons, and heads of state who had come from every corner of the globe, all eager for a share of Saudi Arabia's vast resources, each promising innovation and mutual prosperity. Most leaders of smaller nations, when given the rare opportunity to address such an imposing assembly, followed an almost predictable script, a rehearsed speech of gratitude for the opportunity, followed by a subtle, or not so subtle, appeal for investment and aid. Humility was expected, perhaps even a certain veiled subservience, a recognition of the disparity of forces in that environment where capital was king and ideas needed to come packaged in impeccable financial projections to even be considered. The dynamic was clear: the powerful listened, the less powerful made their pleas, and the flow of resources followed a generally known path. And it was in this context of well-defined expectations and implicit hierarchies that a name, almost lost at the end of the day's extensive agenda, began to generate a murmur of curiosity, and even a slight disdain among the more experienced delegates. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, a nation nestled in the heart of West Africa, a country that many there would have difficulty locating on a world map, let alone imagining what kind of relevant proposal he could bring to a forum of economic superpowers. Eyebrows were raised in silent questioning, and some even exchanged glances that questioned the purpose of his presence. When he finally entered the room, not with the pomp of other heads of state but with a discretion that contrasted with the opulence around him, the difference became even more striking, capturing attention in an unexpected way. At 35, Ibrahim Traoré was noticeably younger than most of those present, but there was a calm and self-assuredness in his bearing that seemed immune to the grandeur of the surroundings. Instead of the impeccably tailored Western suit that was the unofficial uniform of those circles of power, he wore the military uniform of his nation, a silent statement of identity and pride that asked for no permission or apology. There was none of the anxious rush to introduce himself to the bigwigs, nor the frantic handing out of business cards that could be seen elsewhere in the room. He simply observed, his eyes taking in every detail, his serene presence creating a small island of introspection amidst the ocean of negotiations and formalities. To many, his figure was a complete outlier, an unexpected element in a carefully calculated equation, and their initial skepticism only deepened, for how could a leader of a country with such a modest gross domestic product actually have anything to say that would interest the Crown Prince and the titans of global industry? This young African president, with his traditional dress and calm demeanor, represented an unknown quantity, an outlier at an event where everything usually followed a well-rehearsed script. While others paraded impressive statistics and promised exponential financial returns, he remained almost like a shadow, biding his time, a vivid contrast to the calculated hustle and bustle around him. No one there could have imagined that this singular figure, from a distant and little-known land, was about to defy all conventions and present a perspective that would shake the foundations of the gathering. The corridors of power are often paved with cynicism and pragmatism, where compassion rarely carries more weight than a lucrative contract, and a vision, to be heard, must be accompanied by solid guarantees. Traoré, however, seemed to operate by a different set of rules, carrying with him not just the hopes of his people but a deep conviction in a different kind of wealth, a wealth that was not measured simply in barrels of oil or shares on the stock exchange. He was there to speak about something more fundamental. While other delegates were trying hard to impress with the complexity of their artificial intelligence projects, or the vastness of their renewable energy plans, the simplicity of Traoré's presence was a statement in itself. He did not bring with him a large entourage, nor a paraphernalia of advisors and marketing experts. His strength seemed to lie in something more intrinsic, a clarity of purpose that emanated from him, and that, little by little, began to intrigue even the most hardened observers of this highly competitive environment. That day in Riyadh promised to follow the usual course of investment summits, with big announcements, strategic handshakes, and the reaffirmation of existing power dynamics. Yet Ibrahim Traoré's silent arrival and distinguished presence had already introduced a dissonant note, an unspoken question that hung in the sophisticated air of the conference center. What could this young leader, from a nation seemingly so insignificant in that context, really offer or say that would make a difference? Little did they know that they were about to witness a lesson in leadership and vision that would echo far beyond those golden walls. And as the morning hours slipped away in a parade of meticulously crafted presentations, with sophisticated graphics and polished executives detailing investment opportunities that promised to revolutionize entire industries, Ibrahim Traoré remained a watchful observer, absorbing the dynamics of the room, the ebb and flow of energy, the way proposals were received. He showed no impatience, just a calm concentration, as if he were deciphering a complex code, waiting for the exact moment when his voice, so different from the others, would truly find an echo in that auditorium of giants. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, despite his discipline and diplomatic courtesy, was beginning to show subtle signs of understandable fatigue. After all, listening to hours of speeches that, while varied in their specific topics, often converged on the same language of profits and market share could wear down even the most resilient leader. Some delegates, sensing the day's progress and the approaching lunch break, were already discreetly checking their watches or whispering about evening commitments, their attention beginning to drift like the morning mist. Then, after a lunch break where the conversation was more about market trends and less about transformative visions, and with the afternoon session already dragging on, the moderator announced, with a formality that bordered on indifference, the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. The applause that followed was polite but remarkably lukewarm, almost a formal greeting, a clear indication that many there saw this moment as a concession to geographic inclusion, a checkbox on a long list of formalities, rather than a genuinely promising business opportunity. Ibrahim Traoré walked toward the podium with firm, deliberate steps, his figure standing out even more for the absence of any technological gadgetry that had become almost obligatory in this type of forum. He did not carry a laptop, nor did he hold a remote control for slides, nor did he have a stack of printed documents for reference. The immense screens that flanked the stage, which had previously displayed dazzling projections of futuristic cities and graphs of exponential growth, remained dark, empty, reflecting only the silent expectation that was beginning to set in. He simply stopped, and for a moment that seemed to stretch, he simply observed the audience. It was then that, breaking the silence that had become almost palpable, his voice rang out, calm but with a timbre that carried a natural authority, projecting itself across the vast hall without any apparent need for amplification. Your Royal Highness, he began, addressing the Crown Prince directly. Distinguished delegates, I have a question for you. The simplicity of his address, the absence of the effusive thanks or formal praise for Saudi hospitality that preceded almost every other speech, immediately caused some people to lean forward in their seats, genuine curiosity beginning to blossom. He did not present demographic statistics for Burkina Faso, list his country's meager natural resources, or try to justify his presence with promises of easy financial returns. Instead, his question hung in the air, defying the pragmatic logic that had dominated the day. When you close your eyes and imagine the future, what do you really see? The question was philosophical, unexpected, and momentarily disarming to an audience accustomed to much more direct and transactional language. It was the beginning of an approach that would prove deeply unusual. Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known for his quick wit and ability to quickly identify the essence of any proposal, raised his eyebrows almost imperceptibly. This, he surely realized, would not be another standard speech. Traoré was not there to ask, nor to fit into the mold that had been tacitly assigned to him. He was there to provoke thought, to start a dialogue on a different level, and his strategy was beginning to sow the first seeds of doubt about the premises that everyone in that room took for granted. The boldness was not in the grandeur of a financial promise, but in the courage to question the very purpose of the relentless pursuit of growth and efficiency that characterized that meeting. Do you see taller buildings, faster computers, more efficient machines? Traoré continued, his voice maintaining the same calm tone but with increasing intensity. Or do you see human beings walking a little taller, dreaming a little higher, with a gleam of renewed dignity in their eyes? This dichotomy, presented so bluntly, began to resonate. The atmosphere in the room, once tinged with professional politeness and incipient boredom, began to subtly shift. The low buzz died down, the phones that had been discreetly being consulted were put away, and a renewed focus was directed at the man on stage, a man who dared to speak not just about business but about the human condition itself, about the essence of progress. Ibrahim Traoré, with his completely unconventional approach, was achieving what many, with their resources and elaborate presentations, had failed to do: capture the genuine, undivided attention of this assembly of powerful men. He had chosen a risky path, that of confronting expectations rather than trying to conform to them. In an environment where time was literally money, he was investing his precious minutes not in numbers but in ideas, in principles. And surprisingly, that bet on substance over form, on vision over immediate transaction, was beginning to show the first signs that it might indeed find fertile ground, even in the seemingly arid soil of skepticism and extreme pragmatism of global high finance. Stepping away from the podium, as if to bridge the physical and symbolic distance that separated him from his listeners, Ibrahim Traoré continued to weave his argument, deepening the subtle critique he had begun. Over the past few hours, he said, his gaze slowly sweeping around the room, seeming to connect with individual faces, I have heard brilliant minds discuss market penetration, profit margins, and return on investment. These are all important metrics, necessary calculations for the business world, no doubt. But I have heard very little about the one resource that truly creates all wealth: human potential. This statement, delivered with quiet conviction, hung in the air like a quiet challenge to the conventional narratives of economic development that had dominated the day. He was shifting the focus from financial capital to human capital, from physical infrastructure to the infrastructure of the spirit and capacity of people. It was a perspective that, while not entirely new, had rarely been articulated with such clarity and passion in a forum devoted primarily to large-scale commercial transactions, and it caused even the most skeptical to sit up, intrigued by the unexpected direction of the speech. I come from a place, Traoré continued, and for the first time a touch of controlled vulnerability mixed with his firmness, that most of you have probably never heard of, or if you have, you may not be able to pinpoint on a map. Burkina Faso, a name that in our language means land of upright people. We do not have the vast oil reserves of some of our neighbors, nor the rich diamond mines that others possess, nor the extensive coastline that facilitates global trade. What we do have, however, is something that has become increasingly rare in today's world: a people who have not yet learned that certain things are impossible. It was then that he reached into the inside pocket of his uniform and pulled out something that made the people sitting in the front rows lean forward, their faces expressing growing curiosity. It was not a state-of-the-art technological device, nor a document with impressive data. It was a small photograph, visibly handled, a little faded at the edges, but it radiated a story. This photograph, he said, holding it up for all to see, though he knew only those closest to him would be able to make out the details. Was taken 3 months ago, in a small village called Gango. The boy in this photograph is 10 years old. His name is Musa, Traoré continued, and his voice, though still at a constant volume, took on a warmer, more personal inflection, as if he were sharing an intimate confidence with every person in the room. Until very recently, Musa had never seen electricity in his home or in his village. His world was plunged into complete darkness as soon as the sun went down, limiting his study, his work, his life itself. There was no power grid, no generators, just the vastness of the African night. The room was now completely silent, everyone's attention completely captured. 3 months ago, Traoré explained, a subtle gleam of pride lighting his eyes, we installed the first community solar panel in Gango. Not with foreign aid money, nor with loans from international development banks that so often come with conditions that perpetuate dependency. We did it with resources that we generated ourselves through reforms in the export of our agricultural products and improvements in the efficiency of our small-scale mining. And do you know what happened when that first, modest but miraculous, light bulb lit up Musa's house and the village square? All eyes were fixed on him. Even Prince Mohammed bin Salman had put down his pen and was watching the young president with an intensity that had not been shown by any of the previous speakers. Musa did not celebrate with effusive shouts or dances, as one might expect from a child faced with such news, Traoré revealed. He looked at his father, with the seriousness of an adult, and simply said, now we can study after the sun goes down. Now we can build something. 10 years old, and his first thought was not about entertainment or comfort, but about productivity, about construction, about the future. That little story, the story of Musa, was the embodiment of the message that Ibrahim Traoré had come to bring to Riyadh. This photograph, ladies and gentlemen, and the story of this boy, represent exactly what I came here to discuss today, he said, and his voice took on a new weight, a new resonance. I have not come to talk about charity, nor about development aid in the traditional model, nor about assistance that often humiliates rather than elevates. I have come to talk about partnership. Real, genuine partnership, between nations that have capital and knowledge, and nations that have an immense hunger, an insatiable thirst for progress and dignity. Traoré's speech was reaching a level of emotional and philosophical depth that far transcended the usual nature of presentations at that summit. He wasn't just selling a project, he was selling a worldview, a new way of looking at relations between the global North and South, between those who have a lot and those who have immense potential yet to be unlocked. And by humanizing the issue, by giving a face and a voice, that of Musa, to his proposal, he managed to touch a sensitive chord that numbers and graphs could never reach. The shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. Initial skepticism had dissipated, replaced by growing respect and rapt attention. Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of a small African nation, was delivering a masterclass on the true meaning of investment and development, challenging his listeners to look beyond the profit spreadsheets and see the inestimable value of the resilient, aspirational human spirit. He was rewriting the script, not just for himself, but potentially for all who dared to listen with an open heart and mind. With the attention of the room firmly in his hands, Ibrahim Traoré moved on to the heart of his message, clearly articulating the nature of the relationship he had come to propose, one that departed radically from the welfare paradigm that had for so long defined interactions between rich and developing nations. Your Highness, he addressed the Crown Prince again, his tone respectful but imbued with unshakable conviction. Your Highness spoke eloquently about the vital need to diversify Saudi Arabia's economy away from its dependence on oil, investing in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, tourism, and entertainment. These are certainly wise and necessary strategies for the future of your kingdom. He paused, allowing his words to settle before offering the crucial counterpoint. But if I may be so bold as to suggest, he continued, and there was a quiet strength in his voice, perhaps the greatest opportunity for your kingdom lies not simply in replacing oil with technology, but in something even more transformative, in replacing one-off financial transactions with lasting human transformations, in investing not just where the wealth already exists and the infrastructure is already in place, but where the rawest hunger for growth and opportunity resides. This statement was a direct bridge to his central proposition. Africa, Traoré proclaimed, and his posture became even more erect, as if he carried on his shoulders the pride of an entire continent, is not a continent that reaches out for alms. We are a continent that offers partnership. 54 nations, more than 1 billion people, most of them under 25 years of age. The youngest, most dynamic and most energetic population on the planet, inhabiting a vast land, immensely rich in essential minerals, fertile arable land and incalculable potential for the generation of renewable energy, especially solar energy. It was then that he, for the first and only time during his speech, turned to technology, but in a minimalist and impactful way. With a simple gesture, he activated a tablet he had brought with him, and on the previously dark screens appeared a vibrant map of the African continent. It was not a map that highlighted poverty or conflict, as was so often seen, but a map crisscrossed by a series of bold dotted lines, connecting west to east, from Senegal to Djibouti. This, he announced, and his voice echoed with the grandeur of the project, is the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor. An interconnected network of modern roads, high-capacity railways, power transmission lines and fiber-optic communication systems, stretching for almost 8,000 kilometers, crossing and linking 12 nations, Traoré explained, as the delegates' eyes followed the lines on the map, many of them beginning to glimpse the scale and ambition of the undertaking. This is not a project dreamed up in distant offices by foreign consultants. It is the largest infrastructure project in African history, conceived, designed and planned by African engineers, economists and visionaries, for the primary benefit of Africans. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What had begun as skeptical curiosity had evolved into genuine interest, and now, faced with the magnitude and logic of the proposal, it was turning into palpable excitement. Phones that had previously been used to kill time were now used to take discrete photos of the projections, and several delegates, including aides close to the prince, began hurriedly taking notes, recognizing the strategic potential that was being revealed. The total estimated cost of fully realizing this vital corridor, Traoré continued, bringing the discussion back to financial terms but in a way that contextualized the investment, is $800 million. A significant sum, to be sure, but considerably less than what Saudi Arabia, for example, invests in the development of a single luxury resort or a futuristic real estate development. Yet the impact of this investment would be truly transformational, echoing for generations. He then went on to outline the multifaceted benefits, first for Africa. Imagine, he said, painting a vivid picture with his words, connecting the agricultural bounty of West Africa with the strategic ports of East Africa, creating food security and new trade routes. Imagine vast solar farms in the heart of the Sahara, generating clean energy to power industrial hubs from Senegal to Sudan. Imagine a high-speed internet network connecting our universities, our young people, our entrepreneurs with global centers of research and innovation, unleashing a wave of creativity and development. But the brilliance of Traoré's proposal lay in his ability to demonstrate unequivocally how the partnership would be profoundly beneficial to Saudi Arabia as well, aligning perfectly with the goals of the Prince's Vision 2030. But that is why this project is of particular and strategic interest to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, he said, turning his gaze directly to Mohammed bin Salman. This is not just about the development of Africa. It is about positioning your kingdom, your highness, as the indispensable bridge between continents, the facilitator of trade and global cooperation. Every ton of cargo that moves through this corridor, he explained with irrefutable logic, could strategically transit Saudi ports on the Red Sea, strengthening its position as a global logistics hub. Every megawatt of renewable energy generated in Africa could be complemented and optimized by Saudi expertise and technology in solar energy. Every new communications network established could be enhanced and expanded through Saudi telecommunications investment and expertise. Conservative estimates. He displayed a slide with concise data. suggests that this corridor could increase trade between Saudi Arabia and Africa by more than 400% within a decade. And then came the final bold statement, the statement that completely redefined the dynamics of that conversation, elevating it from a simple project presentation to an invitation to historic greatness. Your Highness, the Trans-Sahel corridor will be built, Traoré declared with quiet but unwavering confidence. My country and our neighbors are already committed to making this vision a tangible reality. We have Chinese partners expressing concrete interest, European investors conducting feasibility studies, and American corporations analyzing the opportunities. We do not need a bailout, Your Highness. We need and offer partnership. That was the essence of his vision, an Africa that stood on its own merits, inviting the world to share in its success, not to remedy its failures. Ibrahim Traoré's statement that the Trans-Sahel corridor would be built, with or without Saudi participation, reverberated through the hall with the force of a silent shockwave. It was a display of self-confidence and determination rarely seen from the leader of a nation considered a minor player in the global geopolitical game, especially when addressing one of the world's largest financial powers. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning system, as everyone present processed the audacity and implications of his words. The tension was palpable. Glances met, some expressing admiration for the courage, others perhaps fearing the Crown Prince's possible reaction. Mohammed bin Salman stood motionless for what seemed like an eternity to the most anxious observers. His face, once expressing keen interest, became an impenetrable mask, his dark eyes fixed on Ibrahim Traoré, assessing, considering. This was the crucial moment, the turning point where the entire presentation could either collapse into a diplomatic embarrassment or soar into a historic triumph. Every delegate in the hall, from industrial magnates to heads of state, understood the gravity of this moment. They were witnessing not just a speech but a possible realignment of forces and perspectives. Finally, the Crown Prince broke the silence. His voice, when he spoke, was low, almost intimate, but charged with an authority that filled the room. President Traoré, he began, every syllable of which was hung with rapt attention. Over the past 5 years, I have heard literally thousands of investment proposals. I have been presented with countless opportunities, grandiose projects and strategic partnerships from every corner of the world. The vast majority of them, I must say, focused primarily on what Saudi Arabia could offer, our abundant capital, our expanding markets, our strategic geographic location, our regional and global influence. He paused meaningfully, his eyes still fixed on Traoré's, as if measuring the depth of the African leader's vision. You, Mr. President, Mohammed bin Salman continued, and a faint note of admiration began to creep into his voice. Were the first person, the absolute first, to focus not on what Saudi Arabia can give, but on what Saudi Arabia can become as part of something bigger. You did not come to ask, you came to offer a perspective, a different role in the future we are building. The implicit recognition in that sentence was immense. Then, slowly, the Crown Prince stood up. The movement alone caused a new frisson of anticipation in the room. As he reached his full height, he addressed not just Traoré but the entire assembly, his voice now carrying with clarity and conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, what we have just witnessed here today is precisely the kind of innovative thinking, the kind of visionary leadership, that will define the next century of global development. President Traoré did not ask us to solve Africa's problems. He invited us, with dignity and clarity, to actively participate in Africa's solutions. He began to walk around his imposing desk, moving toward Ibrahim Traoré, who stood at center stage, watching with the same serene calm he had demonstrated from the beginning. This, the prince declared, approaching the leader of Burkina Faso, is exactly the kind of partnership that Vision 2030 was designed to foster. Relationships based not on dependence but on mutual benefit, not on charity but on shared growth, not on hierarchy but on deep respect for the unique contributions of each partner, regardless of their size or apparent wealth. Standing directly in front of Traoré, at a distance that made the exchange almost personal, though every word was still audible to the attentive audience, the Crown Prince spoke with surprising candor. Mr. President, he said, and now there was no trace of skepticism on his face, only genuine recognition. Your Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor project represents precisely the kind of transformational investment that Saudi Arabia not only wants but needs to support. And we do so not because we see Africa as a charity case in need of our benevolence, but because we see Africa as an indispensable partner in building the economic future of our planet. Then came the announcement that sent ripples of surprise and genuine excitement throughout the hall. The Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman declared loudly and clearly, will commit $500 million to the first phase of development of the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor. Additional commitments will be conditional on the progress of the project, the achievement of established milestones, and the effective participation of partner nations. Several delegates held their breath, some even let out audible gasps of astonishment. It was not just the significant amount of money, but the speed of the decision and the fundamental change in approach it represented. But the prince was not finished. There was yet another demonstration of the profound impact that Traoré's vision had had. In addition, he continued, as the buzz of surprise still echoed, Saudi Arabia will establish a permanent African Partnership Office here in Riyadh. This office will be specifically dedicated to identifying, developing and nurturing opportunities for South-South cooperation, strengthening ties between our kingdom and African nations. And President Traoré, he turned back to the Burkinabe leader, I would like to personally invite you to chair the advisory board of this vital new initiative. The offer was unprecedented. African leaders were often invited to Riyadh as ceremonial participants or, at best, as recipients of aid. Never as strategic partners in shaping Saudi foreign and investment policy, much less to lead a council of such importance. Ibrahim Traoré accepted with a simple, dignified nod, but his eyes conveyed the magnitude of what had just happened. This was not just about money or infrastructure. It was about respect, about recognition, about validation that partnership between equals could be infinitely more powerful and productive than any form of patronage, however well-intentioned. The skeptic had, in fact, been deeply and completely convinced. Ibrahim Traoré's response to Prince Mohammed bin Salman was as concise as it was meaningful, echoing the dignity he had embodied throughout their meeting. Your Highness, he said, his voice firm but thick with restrained emotion. This partnership will not be remembered just for the miles of roads or the power lines we will build together. It will be remembered as the defining moment when the global South truly began to cooperate rather than compete, the moment when wealth became a tool to create more wealth for all, not just to accumulate more wealth for the few. A genuine smile, the first truly relaxed one of the day, lit up the Crown Prince's face. Mr. President, he replied, I believe you are absolutely right, and this partnership will benefit our nations and our peoples in ways we can barely begin to imagine today. As the formal session came to a close and the applause, this time thunderous and sincere, died down, the true energy of the meeting was revealed in the side conversations, in the corridors and in the adjacent rooms. Delegates from other African nations immediately surrounded Ibrahim Traoré, no longer with looks of curiosity or doubt, but with palpable respect and an eager desire to understand how their own countries could integrate into this promising new architecture of cooperation. European and American representatives, for their part, began hastily recalculating the implications of this nascent and powerful Afro-Saudi alliance for their own relations and strategic influence on the African continent. News of the partnership and the substantial Saudi investment spread like wildfire beyond the tightly sealed walls of the conference center, prompting immediate and dramatic reactions in global financial markets. African stock markets rallied sharply as astute investors quickly recognized the catalytic potential of an infrastructure development of this magnitude, now backed by the credibility and vast resources of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. On social media, the story went viral, with young Africans sharing clips of Traoré's speech, accompanied by captions such as, "This is real leadership," and, "Finally, someone who speaks for us as an equal on the world stage." International media coverage was extensive, though predictably divided in its interpretations. Many Western outlets focused on the geopolitical implications, analyzing how this new dynamic could alter the balance of power and traditional influence of European nations and the United States in Africa. Chinese media, on the other hand, highlighted the competitive aspects, noting that the Trans-Sahel corridor, now with strong Saudi support, could represent a significant new factor in the landscape of major infrastructure projects on the continent, potentially rivaling its own Belt and Road Initiative. In the Middle East, publications celebrated the partnership as further evidence of Saudi Arabia's growing global leadership under Mohammed bin Salman. Perhaps the most significant response, however, came from other leaders on the African continent. In the 48 hours following the announcement in Riyadh, presidents and prime ministers from across Africa began contacting both the governments of Saudi Arabia and Burkina Faso. The president of Senegal called to discuss connecting its ports to the Trans-Sahel corridor. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia expressed interest in exploring synergies to extend the network by connecting it with existing infrastructure financed by other partners. Even the leadership of South Africa, with its more developed economy, began discussions about how it could contribute to and benefit from this comprehensive continental project. Back in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the popular reaction was electrifying, an explosion of pride and hope. Citizens gathered in squares, around makeshift radios and television sets, to listen to and celebrate the diplomatic triumph of their president. For a nation that had long been accustomed to being seen as a mere recipient of aid, often ignored or patronized by major international powers, to see its leader treated as an equal, as a strategic partner by one of the world's most powerful and wealthy kingdoms, was a moment of profound national significance and validation. Yet Ibrahim Traoré, true to his pragmatic nature, remained focused on implementation and results, rather than getting lost in celebration. In interviews after his return from Riyadh, he consistently emphasized that the real work was just beginning. A handshake in Saudi Arabia, however significant, he told reporters with characteristic seriousness, means absolutely nothing if we cannot deliver concrete results here in Africa. True partnership is proven through consistent performance, not just through eloquent promises. And this practical and determined approach characterized every subsequent stage of that historic collaboration. The first concrete step, away from the media spotlight, was the establishment of the Trans-Sahel Corridor Coordination Office in Ouagadougou, a joint team of Burkinabe engineers, economists, and planners working alongside Saudi technical advisors and experts. Its mandate was simple in its formulation but immensely ambitious in its scope: to transform the infrastructure corridor concept into a tangible, operational reality within a 5-year timeframe. The Saudi commitment proved to be much more than symbolic. Within months, Saudi engineering teams were conducting detailed feasibility studies across the Sahel region, while construction companies from the kingdom were bidding for preliminary contracts. Most importantly, the partnership maintained its central focus on equality, mutual respect, and shared benefit. Rather than simply funding African projects with Saudi money, the collaboration involved genuine knowledge transfer and a robust capacity-building program. African engineers worked alongside Saudi experts, absorbing new technologies and methodologies. African economists actively contributed to the strategic and financial planning of projects. And crucially, local and regional African companies were given priority in construction and supply contracts, ensuring that the development created jobs and strengthened the local economy. 6 months after that transformative meeting in Riyadh, the first section of the Trans-Sahel corridor broke ground in a ceremony that was deliberately modest but charged with powerful symbolism. Rather than a lavish affair with international dignitaries flying in from around the world, the groundbreaking ceremony was attended by local community leaders, local engineers, and most importantly, the workers who would actually build this new artery of progress. In his speech, Traoré captured the essence of the moment. Today, we are not just breaking ground for a new road. We are breaking ground for a new model of how nations can and should work together, proving that partnership is more powerful than patronage, that dignity is more valuable than charity, and that the Global South can, and will, write its own story of development and prosperity. And in Gango, Little Musa, now with access to light to study at night, dreamed of being one of the engineers who would build the future of his continent, a future where African leadership was, in fact, redrawing the map of international relations. This incredible story shows us that vision, courage, and belief in dignity can move mountains and transform skepticism into partnership. If you were inspired by Ibrahim Traoré's journey and the audacity of his proposal, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one, which prove that the impossible is often just the beginning of a great story. Leave a like if this message touched you and comment below what impressed you most about this meeting that changed the course of continents. Your participation is very important to us,